always happens in sports, in business, and in war, there's a back and forth. You learn how to do something, I learn how to counter it. It's not a exact Cold War, but it certainly has echoes of it. It's sometimes, described as a strategic competition. When does competition move into conflict?
When our post-everything world has turned life upside down, how do you even know which end is up?
If you're committed to a community or a cause greater than yourself, you don't have the luxury of checking out or the freedom to burn out.
It's not enough to just keep surviving. We need to thrive again.
This is Post Everything,
a podcast about remapping culture and rethinking leadership in a liminal age. Today, John and I are talking to Peter Warren Singer, who is a strategist at New America, a professor of practice at Arizona State University, and founder and managing partner at Useful Fiction, LLC. He previously served as the director of the Center for 21st Century Security and was described in the Wall Street Journal as, quote, the premier futurist in the national security environment. If you've been following Post Everything for a while and any of that sounds familiar, it's because we actually first talked to Peter Singer way back in the summer of 2023, which feels like so long ago. But as part of our second season, which was all about artificial intelligence. Today, we are following up on that conversation to process both what's changed in the last 2.5 years since we last talked, as well as what other changes we might be able to anticipate over the next few years. And while a lot of our conversation dives into defense and national security issues and events, because that's his expertise, he still offers a whole lot of insight into both how to make sense of global events, how that is driving things closer to home, and as well as the bigger picture in how we can respond to that. So without further ado, let's dive right in.
We're here with Peter Singer. Peter, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. Appreciate you having me back.
Well, it's been about 2.5 years since we talked to you last. And, I was so tempted the other day. I was watching some videos, and there's this video of this guy fighting 20 robots. And I was so tempted to kick off. How many robots do you think Brad could fight at once? But we won't be that unsophisticated.
Are they robots the size of a horse? Or are they tiny robots? You remember that whole thing of like...
Yeah. It was a mixture. It was like it was like 19 little robots that this guy was able to take, and the one big one got him in a boxing match. So anyways, we'll get on to more sophisticated things. But as you think about the last 2.5 years and how much AI has become part of the common day vernacular with people, are you looking back, and we can't help but think that you're looking back and saying, hey, I told you so, or at least that you've wanted to. Because a lot of the things that you have written a couple of years ago were so accurate. What's been most surprising or encouraging or concerning to you regarding the development of AI? And have you changed your mind about anything?
Gosh, there's so many different elements of that. So when we started the project that you're referring, that we were able to talk about previously, its nonfiction name was AI Visualized, and it was basically a research project to take all the things that we were seeing the early bones of beginning to develop, inventions, copyrights, investment made by corporations, plans announced by everyone from the police to the Washington, D.C. Fire department to Amazon, and say, hey, this is headed our way. Let's try and visualize what might happen with it. And the output of that was a book that we talked about called Burn In, that basically it was a smash up of take all that research, but tell it through a story. So since then, many of the elements of it have, of course, become real. And I think the other aspect that we were trying to, argue is it's going to be both for better and for worse. And I think that's, as we're all experiencing right now, there's certainly elements of it that are for better, and then there's elements of it that are for worse. If I'm being, self, instead of congratulatory and like, hey, what was surprising? Maybe what did we not get right? I think the rapid effect of it into our politics, not just kind of AI use in political campaigns, but very obviously the influence of not just one, but multiple, depending on, I mean, they're everything from, you would describe them as tech visionaries, if you're a fan, to if you're kind of mid-tier, you'd say tech bros. If you don't like them, you'd say tech oligarchs, right? But hyper influential, not just hyper rich, but increasingly social, politically influenced. And then and in everything, right? Everything from domestic politics to playing roles in war, right? But then the other part is the pretty, again, I'm struggling for the right adjective, the level of enthusiasm for this technology in the stock market right now, and the question that of course colors, the most of the growth in the economy is from, it's either AI or it's healthcare. And, even you're like, oh, but what about it's the construction of data centers for it, or power company. And so, and we have this question remaining with us of, is this sustainable or is it a bubble? I don't think we saw that happening that rapidly, and feeling like, wow, we're going to be right in the middle of it just a couple years later.
To put that into perspective, there's been reporting that AI-related capital expenditures have accounted for as much as 92% in U.S. GDP growth in the first half of 2025. That is insane. And so, I mean, I think it was this last fall, like maybe early fall, late summer, when I heard it was like I remember the first time I heard somebody saying like, we might have a bubble here. And then I think it took about 4 weeks for that to become like a recurring news story. Like, is there an AI bubble? Is that the case? And so that is I mean, I don't know how anybody could have predicted just how quickly that much money has gotten behind this.
And I think, there's the bubble part of it, which is kind of like how to put it, a somewhat maybe near-term question. It's a question of days, it's a question of weeks, it's a question of months, maybe it's a question of years. Is it a bubble or not? That's kind of like stock market prices and the like. But within that, what you were hitting is this interesting sort of larger, it's an economy, but what I love talking about with you guys is it also affects social, cultural, political, faith, whatever, is that you could have this massive change, arguably even growth in our economy, but that's it, massive profits, but that doesn't mean prosperity. That doesn't mean employment, right? So you can see massive growth, not just billions, maybe trillions being made, but you haven't seen that play out in terms of the equivalent level of jobs, and or certainly how most people feel about the world, the economy, because much of AI and to the hardware side, robotics is squeezing out efficiencies as opposed to leading to all sorts of new jobs and new types of jobs. Or in the areas where it is leading to new types of jobs, it's not your classic story of, a new factory was opened up in this town and they hired 1,000 people, and in turn that led to more teachers and painters and construction workers in that town. No, it's maybe a factory was open, but it's relatively small numbers of people, or yes, there was a construction boom from it to build the data center, but it's not as if those jobs are going to be there over a generation. And so I think that's the sort of as the kids would say it, the vibes are not very positive if maybe some people are looking at their stock portfolio going, okay, it's doing good, but is it a bubble? Those are two different discussions right now.
Man, and that is, I really appreciate that distinction because, at my own church, we have a kind of a high percentage of our congregation are either software engineers, data scientists, or adjacent. And man, the number of times I've heard someone say like, I cannot help but feel like I am training up my replacement and I don't know what else I will do. And so there is a lot of like real anxiety around that, yeah, the economic side, on the, like the asset class, like what you're describing is one thing, but it's a polar opposite on the ground. So yeah, I really appreciate that. What, you know, you are a mad scientist. That's capital M, capital S, with the U.S. Army TRADOC, which is the Training and Doctrine Command. So I'm just curious and want to kind of indulge in some curiosity around your specialty, which is in national security consulting, military and intelligence applications of technology. And so I've been kind of itching to ask you a question, because while the Ukraine war was going on when last we talked, it's a really catastrophically long and tragic war. But it's been since then that not just drones or even remote drones, but actually autonomous drones and some really creative, very cheap use of the combination of AI and robotics, like you described in Burn-In, has been adopted at a pace that is just incredible. Like I've seen pictures of Ukrainian towns that are like in the no man's land between forces that are laced with fiber optic threads. So many, it looks like it's covered in spider webs. Yes. And I think that it was that image and picture that really hit home, like just how many of these are being used and how quickly that had to have, like, I mean, been designed, innovated, tested, manufactured, and then deployed on a battlefield setting. Can you? I mean, you don't have to talk about that particular part, but like, can you summarize just like what you've seen in terms of the way that war has been a catalyst for technological development?
Yeah, it's a great question. The early, there was this interesting, how to put this, there had once been a debate within the military world around the idea of AI robotics, you know, now commonly thought of as drones. And it first went from, we'll never ever use them, to then it moved into what people are kind of familiar with from the Iraq War, Afghanistan, Predator-style drones. And there was this debate of, okay, we'll use them, but only for these kinds of wars against that are not military on military, but
counterinsurgency.
Yeah, and but for big wars, no, it'll still be the old way. And that wasn't just a military debate, it was even like an academic debate. So there was a academic journal, like kind of the leading journal for security studies, that in early 2022 had an article that basically said that very same thing. And directly the Ukraine war ended that debate, whether it's in military circles, academic circles. These technologies are very clearly here. They're now accepted in these roles. But the change that happened that you put your finger on, I think there's three different things that have played out over the last several years within the Ukraine war. One is the scale, the numbers have gone from, you know, whether it was the U.S. and Iraq and Afghanistan to the early weeks of the Ukraine conflict, you know, the numbers were in the tens or maybe hundreds of drones that you were using. This year, Ukraine is on pace to either build or buy, but use roughly 4 million drones.
Whoa.
And we're talking of all sorts of different sizes, shape, forms, but around 4 million. Now, that puts, if you'll permit me, a problem for the U.S. when we look at, are we keeping pace? So right now, the U.S. military is on pace to build or to gain roughly 50,000. Now, the leadership in the Pentagon said recently, okay, over the next, we want to move to getting 1 million over the next 2 to 3 years. One, that's still not the number that the Ukrainians are using. Two, when you use phrases like 2 to 3 years, that's your aspiration, right? That's not like this is my specific program to get this exact amount. So, but irregardless, the numbers were orders of magnitude more. We're adding zeros and zeros and zeros to drone use. The second is using them in all sorts of novel, new, inventive ways. And so it's everything from people may have seen in the news the Ukrainians sneaking drones into the middle of Russia, and they're taking off from hidden boxes and tractor trailers, and then they're destroying these multi-million dollar Russian strategic bombers, or it's Ukrainians using a mix of basically their ground robotics. They think of them as like the size of a lawnmower, but they're tracked. They're armed with machine guns. They've used those to take a trench line. All sorts of new different ways. And oh, by the way, the Russians have been inventive too. They've been doing swarm attacks on Ukrainian cities where they kind of overwhelm them with numbers of drones. So all sorts of new inventive ways. And, the issue back for the US is everyone's watching and learning. So it's not just how do we learn from that, but expect to see these same uses in other conflicts. So, for example, Israel was attacked by kind of a drone swarm approach that mimicked what had happened in Ukraine. This was about like 4 months ago, coming out of Iran and Yemen. And then we have the third, which links to actually what you talked about, that image of what you saw in the Ukrainian cities of the fiber optics looking like spider webs. That really comes from what always happens in sports, in business, and in war. There's a back and forth. You learn how to do something, I learn how to counter it. And so, early on, it was the drones were remotely operated by essentially like a radio signal, or they relied on GPS pulling down from a satellite. The response to that was to jam it. So then the response moved in two different directions. Either you have this little fiber optics wire, it's like, literally a wire running from it, so you can't jam it because it's direct connection. Or you move towards it's more and more autonomous. So the people aren't, either it's the person's directly controlling it, but you can't jam it, or I unleash it. And so that the spread of the fiber optics and everything looking like big spiders is really, it's a reflection of the back and forth of learning.
Man, yeah. I mean, I remember, when I was still in the Army National Guard, during the Iraq War and after, there was a whole lot of conversation around how our multi-million-dollar weapons platforms, like whether we're talking about the Abrams tank or the F-35, the Joint Strike Fighter, is this technologically how helpful are these massively expensive technologically advanced vehicles when they can be blown up with an IED, but that didn't seem to really happen. We just shifted the design in that advanced technology, but this, I'm struggling to see how you can make a similar pivot. And that manufacturing capacity seems so important in the grand scheme of things. What it's almost like what you're describing is we've all been using smartphones, and it turns out a landline is actually really good, and we need to get one again. But maybe to kind of, speaking of manufacturing capacity, I know one of the major discussions in AI, and also since the last time we talked to you, one of the major points of argument for why we need to throw everything we have at developing artificial intelligence is this kind of functional arms race with China. And I can't even tell you how many times I've heard a dismissing of safety concerns in a lot of ways, because if we don't, we lose, and it's game over in ways that I haven't heard outside of the Cold War with the Soviet Union. I think just generally, to start with a general question about that, how I go back and forth from feeling like that is a genuine concern or a cop out that is used to kind of blanket over safety concerns for the sake of the almighty dollar. But like maybe there's a third option there too. How should we be hearing that, from your perspective of being kind of on the insides of a lot of these conversations?
Yeah, I wish I could give a direct yes or no, but I think it's both things at play. I think personal opinion, it's self-evident that the United States is in a rivalry with China. That rivalry has economic elements to it. It has political. It has military. And it's not a exact Cold War, but it certainly has echoes of it. It's sometimes described as a strategic competition. And the worry is, when does competition move into conflict? And is it a Cold War style, or is it an outright visions of World War III or whatever? But I do think there is a very, and both sides are overt about it. They're very clear. They view the other as their rival. So AI is injected into that for a variety of reasons. Both that it's seen as this, game-changing technology, and the idea that sort of whoever it's the key to the future of the world economy. To it brings you battlefield advantages. To if you're a China, you also think, hey, this matters for observing and controlling my own populace. The point is, in the same way that past nations competed over control of oil to atomic power, very clearly we've got something of akin playing that in AI. So you see the push for that. I think it's a very valid push. I've been a voice in that push. But I think, as you've said, there does appear a little bit of like an instrumental use of that by often companies, or to go back to our earlier discussion, whether you want to describe them as tech visionaries, tech bros, or tech oligarchs, sort of saying, let me do what I want, or even better, give me money to do what I want, because if you don't, the United States will lose this tech race. And so you've seen this kind of interesting change in the dialogue coming from them. And again, maybe it's because they've realized it, or maybe they're being instrumental. So if you go back like 10 years, the same individuals were all about gaining access to the Chinese market. And that's everything, and or locating production there for cheaper, being able to deliver it. And so the examples range from Mark Zuckerberg literally asking the Chinese leader, giving him how should I name my daughter? Like, what should be my daughter's name? To Elon Musk meeting with and that's just decades ago. That's within the year, meeting with senior Chinese leaders, carrying over their talking points on Taiwan, etc. Because huge amounts of his personal wealth depend on Tesla production and purchasing. But the point is, what I'm getting at is that there's been kind of this pivot from that to many of the same figures talking about, hey, don't let my industry be regulated, because if you do, we'll fall behind, we'll lose to China. And so there's been this kind of tenor change in it. And again, do you see that as it was a road to Damascus moment? They came to a new realization. Alternatively, they saw a different world. They saw we went from a world where the tech industry was being kind of put up on a pedestal, to the tech industry was facing a lot of critique, a lot of potential regulation, and maybe this is a pivot reflecting that too. Eye of the beholder, but I think you've put it correctly, that we're in a situation now where, at least at the national level, the discussion about AI is often bringing in these U.S. China rivalry elements to it. And that's whether we're talking about regulation and privacy law, to the discourse of data centers and what they should be allowed to do, and if there's one being built in your community. There often is this like national security side being brought into it that was not part of the discourse, say, 10 years ago.
Yeah, it is. It is kind of. It is pretty amazing just how quickly it felt like Silicon Valley was hyper focused on creating. I'm just going to call them digital wastes of time. You know, these apps that are designed to just extract your attention, monetize for profit, like basically using the social media approach to starting and selling a profitable company, to now this is for national defense. And I think that kind of whiplash has, I mean, I'm still waiting for somebody, and this is a bit of an aside, but I'm still waiting for some leader in somebody to actually cast a compelling vision that actually says, here's what this means, here's how we need to think about this. But like it just hasn't. There's a vacuum there, it feels like. And one of the places I see that vacuum most is in regards to Taiwan, right? Because I've been kind of privately saying to friends that, like, I don't know how we don't see China at least attempt an attack or invasion on Taiwan probably in the year leading up to the next presidential election. And then the CCP publicizes an order to the military that they need to be prepared to invade Taiwan by 2027. And there's a historical reason for that, because Taiwan is a breakaway country from China. But now, because of AI, there's this additional complication that the TSMC, the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, is basically the only game in town for the advanced semiconductors needed for everything from the iPhone to AI chips. So, can you talk about how AI, like, is that? Am I wrong about that? Is that overblown? Is that kind of propagandist rhetoric coming from China, or has this actually kind of upped the ante, so to speak, on this, and actually makes it more likely?
So that 2027 date has become a center of discussion in kind of national security circles, but obviously, kind of extended beyond, coming from two different directions. One, as you noted, is coming out of China. There's different, been voiced, we want capability to do X, Y, and Z. But there's also famously a U.S. Flag officer said 2027 is the date that I believe, therefore we believe, is the date they're going to try it. And so everything that we do is to be ready for that 2027 date as well. So it's definitely kind of this center date. And then, again, you even voiced, there's a relationship to the, whether there's an election or whatever, right? I think for me, there's a couple of things, to unpack out of that. One is, what could a crisis, a conflict look like related to Taiwan? It could be everything from, you voiced it as like a full scale invasion, troops crossing the Taiwan Straits, either in boats or in paratroopers, missiles flying. And then you get to, okay, is it just happening in Taiwan? Does it involve the US or not, just happening in that area? Or does it extend and it touches Guam, Hawaii, continental United States? Does it involve electronic, cyber warfare, or missiles, or whatever? But it's an outright conflict.
Mm-hmm.
Or is it a blockade? It's China says, you know what? No shipping within 100 miles coming into Taiwan. And then you get sort of the questions related to a blockade of, does the United States resist that blockade and we escort vessels through? In turn, civilian vessels. If I own a civilian container ship, do I, even if the U.S. is protecting me, do I want to go through that blockade? But you could imagine, maybe it's not an outright conflict, but they could pressure Taiwan through a blockade. So second thing, the stakes, right? And you talk very accurately. Taiwan is at the center of certain kind of components of the modern economy, including a particular type of chip. That's been interpreted in a couple of different ways. It's either been interpreted, that's exactly why China would want to seize it. It's also been interpreted as, I've heard other people say, that's exactly why they would never pull the trigger, because it would ripple back and destroy their own economy, and the regime needs that. That's exactly why the United States has to defend Taiwan too. That's exactly why we need to create our own equivalent so that we don't have to, right? So even that sort of fact of their centrality, people draw out these different conclusions. But I'll end by saying one thing is, my fear with like the 2027 date is that it's both a positive outcome, but maybe a fear. I should phrase it that way. It's like Y2K. So what if, we end 2027 and then people are like, aha, we made it through the year. Nothing happened. Kind of like with Y2K, except, go talk to the people who worked in, your IT department back in Y2K. And I realize I'm saying this, there's like part of your audience is like, I don't know what you're talking about with IT. What is that? But like, if you're of a certain age, but like, part of the reason why things didn't all break down on Y2K is people spent the year ahead of it getting everything set, right? Yeah. So your ideal outcome is nothing happens in terms of like a conflict, a crisis in 2027, but that you don't interpret it and say, well, there was nothing ever to worry about. It doesn't happen because you did a series of smart things to ensure stability, to ensure deterrence. So that all of the different actors every single day of 2026, but also 2027, woke up and said, today's not the day to go to war. It's just not the right day to go to war. And that's the outcome that you want continuing through, years beyond that.
Yeah. No, I've heard it framed similarly as like, we didn't have a second 9/11, not because there weren't people trying to make a second 9/11, but because we prevented it. Because we learned from the first 9/11. So that makes total sense, but also not wanting to rest on your laurels because it's not like the danger's necessarily past. Part of the reason why I'm asking all of this too is, right, like this is the military application side of these things and part of the setting. But what's fascinating to me is that, I'm a history buff, and, for the last 100 years, most of our, especially late 20th century advances in technology started actually as a military need, right? It's people looking for a competitive advantage, countries looking for a competitive advantage in the military sector. And then those technologies, turns out, have a really helpful, civilian, day-to-day, ordinary, corporate use. And so that's been the direction. It's innovated in a military setting, but then backfills into the civilian. But what we're seeing now feels like it's turned that upside down, in that, there's, Google's Gemini is, working with the Department of Defense, or I think it's Department of War now. I'm not sure which is we're supposed to say, but, Grok, with X/Twitter, Elon Musk Grok, that was just recently announced is going to be partnering with the DoD in some capacity. And so we're seeing the exact opposite happen. Is that being weird? Is there any significance to that? Does that change the shape of how technology is being developed in any way? Are there implications from that? And if so, what might those be? How can we think about that?
Yeah, there's a couple of trends that are coming together to drive exactly what you're talking about. One is where is the spending happening on research and development it's basically shifted over the last roughly 70 plus years, right? So the amount that the U.S. government was spending on developing new technologies, back during World War II, it's much higher percentages of the economy. And that extends for the initial parts of the Cold War as well. So it's the technology break, and it's either happening at actual U.S. government labs and research centers. Famously, the internet comes out of DARPA. It's originally called ARPANET, but it's also, what's a different example? Fluoride for your teeth comes out of a military research program because dental health is actually pretty, you need to keep your sailors fit and in service. And one thing was dental health. I mean, so there's all these, it's both direct government labs and or investment in university research and or corporate research labs. So it's the work happening at the MITs on radar and computing. It's Bell Labs. It's all of that as a percentage, as a policy, as a kind of ideology. That's flipped over the last several generations, and that amount has gone down. And most of it's been pushed to its no corporate side. And the story of Silicon Valley is, I think, a perfect example of that. Silicon Valley starts because of military research. It comes from a combination of, there's an airfield there, Moffett Field. There is a series of military research and programs. And then moving from like the 1960s to today, basically Silicon Valley, there's a clustering of companies, and then Silicon Valley goes from this place that's dependent on Defense Department or War Department, whatever you call it, U.S. military funding, to no, it's not dependent on it. It's coming up with all the technologies that you were kind of making fun of earlier. But that's the story of Silicon Valley. The second thing that's happened is the game-changing technologies of the world have lower barriers to entry. So if you think about what it takes to build, buy, use atomic power versus AI, versus a drone, you don't need the Manhattan Project. You can do it with a small set of people. You could do it with it could be within a corporation. Your corporation could be a startup. And so that combination, as you've put it, is kind of shifted to in a lot of different areas. It's the military reacting to technology developments on the civilian side rather than the other way around, particularly in the areas of anything that's kind of software related. The effect of that, I mean, it does everything from, it shifts we're seeing shifts in the defense economy, which companies thrive, how you buy from those companies, what you buy from those companies. It shifts to, what's deployed on the battlefield. Much of that, the drone usage in Ukraine, huge portions of those drones is basically jury rigging civilian drone, including Chinese made drones, a huge portion of them. It definitely, it allows non-government actors to have the kind of powers that governments used to have. And it can, we've seen that in might be organizations. We've seen terror groups out of the Middle East, or even how you kind of frame them, the Houthis in Yemen. Houthis in Yemen are a quasi-government, but kind of non-government group. But at the end of the day, they're operating out of Yemen, which is literally one of the poorest nations in the world. And yet, they've been able to fly drones, missiles, cruise missile strikes against the United States. We against our naval forces and the Red Sea, against civilian shipping. we attacked them with a bombing campaign and a missile campaign that roughly cost about $5 billion, and the Houthis are still in business. So there's that kind of non-state capability, but there's also like the power of individuals. You referenced Grok. So Grok is coming out of Elon Musk, X/Twitter/Tesla/SpaceX. That he's if you think about like Starlink, it's provided part of this non-state capability I've talked about. And again, there's bad sides, there's good sides of it. There's people in Iran right now that are linked to the internet because of Starlink, which the government's trying to keep them from being on the internet. As you and I are talking right now, there's the protests that are taking place. So it's given that kind of power to maybe human rights and democracy activists. But there was also episodes reportedly out of Ukraine where Ukraine wanted to conduct a military operation, and Elon Musk said, no, I don't agree with that one, and you're not going to get access. And so that's the kind of power that an individual did not have over a government military in the past. I can turn your comms on and off.
And that is the kind of dynamic you very presciently described in your science fiction book in Burn-In, right? Like that kind of massive, it's not just a continuing of decentralization that we've seen basically since the internet. It's also an acceleration of it. Is that a fair kind of like summary of what you're describing? Like the overall impact is a continued decentralization of power on a global scale.
It's this combination of, and you can kind of think of it at the two ends of the pole. There's the decentralization of it, but also the consolidation, the growth of it in certain nodes and certain even individuals. And that can happen simultaneously. So people can have more power, more information at their fingertips than ever before, and we could be talking about both the wealthiest individual in the world and the poorest individual in the world. Yet at the same time, you could have an individual can have greater power and influence over global dynamics, global economy, because of a consolidation of this sort of a combination of economic, financial, technologic, and maybe even kind of social cultural power.
Yeah.
Peter, as we wind down a little bit, I want to just pick your brain for a minute away from the military side of it, and actually think about like culture and formation. One of the things when we talked about AI is we can't help but talk about the economic disruption. We've already heard you explore that just a little bit, and that's very much part of the national conversation right now. But when you think about the aspects on American life in general, what do you see being most disrupted? What do you see being least disrupted as AI continues to develop?
There was a survey taken of around 300 experts, computer science professors of sociology, and about sort of the effect of AI on what you just asked, social, politics, healthcare, personal life. And they asked him kind of, do you think it's a positive or a negative? And it was interesting. They found certain places that the experts overall kind of felt overwhelmingly. I apologize. There's a dog right outside that wants to weigh in with the interview. Not a robot dog. But how to put this? In general, they saw positive effects on certain areas like healthcare. They saw negative effects on certain areas. Actually, we talked about one already, warfare. Another, they felt politics. Another that was really interesting was how people treat each other and our social connections. They felt it was creating more negativity. We could kind of go into that further, but I thought what was pretty fascinating is across the board, on almost no topic area did the experts say no effect at all, no change at all.
Wow.
And again, I think there's as we talked about, there's an economic aspect of this, how it's reshaping what jobs prosper, what jobs don't, what regions of the nation prosper, what regions don't. Um, what professions. I think there's a very interesting dynamic, and you mentioned this, like you had software engineers worried about their future, whereas that would so it's not a how to put this, a very traditional white collar, blue collar. There's certain we've got uh, folks like that worried about their futures too. There is a nationwide shortage of car mechanics right now. It's a really weird. There's these. So, but the point is, what I was getting at is, um, I think one of the cultural, social, but all the way down to family effects that may be most felt in America is we take such meaning in our lives from our jobs. There's something American, like I don't, and we can unpack, but like we really do take a lot of meaning, and we overwork. We have, I mean, and we take pride in that, and we oh, this nation don't work as hard as us, or those people with that 38-hour work week. But what I'm getting at is, so if that's threatened in some way, the meaning that you take from your job, your personal meaning, the role in your community, how it affects your family, if it's disruptive, I think you will feel that. So the if someone's to go back to that example of the software engineer that went from I took all the right classes, I got in a profession that's growing and high pay, to hold it, despite doing everything the right way in quotation marks, is my career over? That's not just an economic question for them. That clearly hits the way they look at themselves, the way they think about their interactions in the community, in their family, maybe how they think about their politics. That's what I get at. Maybe it's just I'm out on a limb, but I do think that aspect may hit America a little bit harder than other nations because of that ethic that we have of taking so much meaning in our lives from our work.
Absolutely. Well, it's interesting to think. I mean, not only are the changes so tremendous brought by AI, and we think about even vocation people being out of work, it can be tempting in light of all that to just go, well, I'm going to ignore this, or I'm going to be paralyzed by change or paralyzed by anxiety. Um, but we actually can still make meaning in the world. We can still do good in the world. Right now, if you're watching on YouTube, you can see that Peter has a pink background. And Peter, what's going on there? Tell us a little bit about what your son's doing.
I'm so glad you asked that, not just because of the personal side, but we've had such a kind of negative Nelly discussion. So I'm really glad we can move to something good. The background to it that I have as my background is a personal story, but hopefully it is maybe an example of driving positive change. My wife is a two-time breast cancer survivor. The good news is that she's on the other end of it. My teenage son watched that experience, but a particular aspect of it, my wife, when she would go through chemo, would always put on these pink, like Chuck Taylor high tops, and wrap herself in a blanket. And it was this kind of combination of, it was like she was gearing up, but she was also kind of comforting herself. And my son watched that and had sort of a double reaction of one, those shoes aren't as cool as they should be, but two, I can help not just her and others. So the same kid who he's now 16, um, the same kid who can't figure out how to pick up clothes off his bedroom floor, created a 501c3 charity called cancerkicks.org that essentially allows people to buy for cancer patients in their lives custom shoes. The kids would call them slides, sandals, blankets, T-shirts that have a whatever message you want to put on them. So if you're someone you know, it could be a message of encouragement. We're thinking of you, Lacey. Other people have put memory names, but basically through cancerkicks.org, you can buy that. But here's the key part. All the profits go to the Breast Cancer Research Foundation. So it's not a for-profit thing, everything. So it's a double win of it both provides comfort to those people, maybe in your lives or in other lives, but also it goes to support the cure so that ultimately people don't have to go through that experience. The second part that's really neat about it is the same structures that they built for cancer themed gear. So again, whether it's a blanket or cool shoes or whatever that have a pink ribbon, or it says, we're thinking of you, Susie, that same backend they built can actually be used for any other organization that's looking to put their logo or brand or message on anything from, you name it, mugs, water bottles, shirts, polos, sweatshirts, vests, tech gear. It's basically anything that an organization, a company, a church, a team would buy from like a typical, what they would call it like a print on demand business, and put their logo on it. They can do the same thing through Cancer Kicks, except the difference is instead of their money being spent on the for-profit, their money would go to Breast Cancer Research Foundation. So we've seen everything from a national agriculture, basically a farming thing, bought shirts for its employees with their logo on it, to a software company bought those. I can't say the brand, but they're the really cool mugs, but with their logo on it, to a sports team looking for backpacks with the team, motto and mascot on it. And so I'm, one, obviously you can hear the sort of the proud dad element of it, but two, I'm like I'm part of his sales team. So I'm taking advantage of it to let people know about it. So yeah, either if there's someone in your network that, has been touched by cancer, and you're looking a way to help them and help a broader cause, or if you've got, so if that would be the cancer themed products, or if, like I said, you're looking for, the kids would call it swag, it's employee gifts, things to hand out at events, that sort of thing. Go to cancerkicks.org and you can see both the corporate catalog and also the individual catalog. So yeah, I think it's I'm a storyteller, and I've been really amazed by the story that my son created out of, what was a tough episode for our family.
That's really cool.
We'll make sure and link all that. I'm on the website now. I found the Instagram. We'll make sure and link all that in the show notes for our guests. So, Peter, thank you for being on Post Everything, sponsored by Cancer Kicks.
Outstanding. Yeah, thank you so much. This is extremely helpful, and thank you for lending your expertise in all this. This is really, really important and good stuff.
Thank you so much, guys.
Brad, interesting to talk with Peter Singer again, having talked with him a couple years back and then revisit with him. What was your takeaway from this time?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of, like I said at the beginning of that kind of part of the interview when we're talking about national security and military application, like I was being a little self-indulgent with my curiosity, because I think those things are both interesting and important, but maybe don't have as much like direct relevance to pastoring in the short term. But I mean, knowing what's going on in the world is definitely helpful for, like how do we help our people interpret and make sense of the world around us. But I keep thinking about some of the things he said toward the very end, especially when he was talking about that survey of experts and who were asked about different various dimensions of ordinary life and how they're anticipating AI changing that. And his point that there was no expert like left a single dimension of life saying no effect at all. It will either get maybe a little bit better, but it sounds like it's going to be mostly negative, especially in the short term. But I mean, that just goes straight to the heart of why you and I are doing this as a project for Post Everything, of like, how do we remap culture and rethink leadership in a liminal age? Because liminality is like being in the process of change. And the first episode we did for the season was all about like what happens when liminality is the new normal. Like what if the in-between is not the in-between, but it is actually a long-term, not season, but an age of change. What if it's an ice age and not just a blizzard or a snowstorm, right? So, I mean, I think that's the biggest piece. But I agree with him that probably the dimension that is going to be most difficult for helping people process and work through is that the vocational one, right? So, I mean, there's a lot there. I think, to paraphrase something he said, we take such meaning from our jobs, but if that is threatened in some way, if it's disrupted, that you will feel that even more, and I'm paraphrasing again, existentially than just economically or materially, right? It's not just like what you're doing with your time thing. It's not just an economic question. It affects everything. And I think he's right that it will hit like American culture even more than maybe some other nations and cultures. But I'm curious what you think about that point, because I felt really conflicted.
Well, so what he said, something that was interesting, like he said, software engineers might be out of jobs. And like, so that I was thinking about that for a second, and I was like, wait a minute.
We've spent 20 years telling people that that's the best job that they could be possibly training for.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like when someone says, hey, I'm a software engineer, it's like, oh, you've got some good training and you're in a good field that's going to be pretty stable for you and your family. And now that might not be true. We're not saying it definitely is true, but it might not be true. And just thinking about, how do you say it? What socioeconomics look like for certain groups of people. And, car mechanics, there's a shortage of car mechanics. All of a sudden that becomes a stable job. Super interesting. Not to make light of people's plight, but interesting to just think about what will that do in terms of the stability of society, socioeconomics, classism. There's far-reaching implications for what that's going to do.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's been a little bit since I feel like I've heard, somebody from Silicon Valley talking about universal basic income, about how there's going to be such a superabundance of goods and services because of AI, and it won't need human beings to produce it, that we are going to need to, have some kind of a universal basic income. And well, I mean, this is good news because everybody can just, this is an opportunity for leisure. And I'm skeptical of that actually being a good thing. I mean, if you've ever seen WALL-E, right? Like the premise is that humanity, escapes to the low Earth orbit, and everybody's only leisure, and everybody is obese, unable to, unskilled, pretty miserable human beings when you have everything done for you. And I don't know that the tech utopia, this vision that's being cast, is actually going to be good for human beings, because, and this is the part I felt really conflicted about when he was saying this, is like, I don't know if this was his intent, but he's kind of saying, like, we're going to have to get used to not getting our existential meaning or that existential dimension scratched by a job or vocation, because I don't think that's possible, right? If you think back to Genesis 1 and 2, right? Adam and Eve were created to fill the earth and subdue it. And Adam was given jobs, first naming animals, but also in tending the garden, expanding it beyond Eden, right? That cultivating, culture making aspect of what it means to be human. Okay, fine. Maybe I don't think that itch is going to just be scratched by having a lot more hobbies, right? Because this is a it's not just the individual extracting meaning from something and choosing, oh, I'm going to get meaning from over here now. Like, this doesn't work like that. Our nature is defined. It's not a blank slate that we can just kind of draw on it whatever we want. And I'm not necessarily saying he's saying that. I just
Right.
that is absolutely what a whole lot of tech utopian minded people are describing. And I think he's right that it will hit America even harder. And I think that there are some ways in which, our work is maybe overvalued in some ways, or maybe it's less that it's overvalued, but like we're undervaluing sense making and meaning making in other dimensions in life. But I don't actually see that going well. I don't think that let's say it actually does happen, and that is the reality that we're looking at. I don't think the majority of the population is going to accept that. And I don't know what we would do otherwise, but I just don't see that. I think there would be some serious social disruption.
Well, so I believe that it was his episode back in season 2 where we talked a lot about the comparison with the Industrial Revolution.
Yeah.
And how that flipped things
Mm-hmm.
and how that changed so much. And then
Mm-hmm.
we explored that a little bit with Nancy Piercy, even how the Industrial Revolution affected masculinity and family life.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, we're looking at some far-reaching implications here. I wonder though, it's not that these types of things haven't happened in other dimensions. It was interesting that he talked about the need for car mechanics and a possibly less need for software engineers. I'm sure at other times in the last couple decades, that has been true of other vocations. Some have dipped down, some have dipped up. But the problem is we just don't know how it's going to land, and the implications feel much more far-reaching than simply a certain industry tanking for a little bit. This feels pretty pervasive. I do think I want to say this in a way that honors the dignity of all who work. But I also want to say I do think that men are going to struggle with a loss of vocation. And that's not to say that women won't, but I'm not a woman. I can't speak from that perspective, so I'll speak as a man. I just wonder what men's ministries at churches are going to be encountering over the next 5 to 10 years as people really do struggle with that. Because I agree with you. I think what Peter's saying is not we can fix this, but man, there's a problem coming. And I think you're right in saying the inherent nature of humanity is to do something with themselves. And the chance of that not happening is pretty scary to think about. I thought what was helpful from him too was just some of the categorical handholds he gave when it came to, I believe he was talking about the Ukraine-Russian war.
Mm-hmm.
And he talked about the scale, like the drone scale.
4 million.
4 million.
This year is what they're anticipating. That's insane.
Yes. Then the novelty and innovation. So as technology advances, it counters each other. Mm-hmm. So that was the third point, but then that leads back to the second point. So you've got to innovate to get around their technology. Mm-hmm. That was all very helpful for me because you see about this drone strike where a tractor trailer drives into Russia and all these drones are released, and you're like, how did we get there? Well, he's telling us scale, novelty, and competitiveness. So,
well, and I think one of the reasons that's even helpful for the kind of economic and vocational part we were just talking about is that, if necessity is the mother of invention, right? Then the necessity for being able to make meaning in the world in ways that are consistent with the nature of human beings, and yes, also as a subset masculine nature as well, then I do believe that we will find and innovate new ways of contributing to the world that maybe we don't fully see yet. And it's not going to only be maybe a return to, blue collar, because I think that's one of the things that is also very different about this revolution versus the Industrial Revolution. Is the Industrial Revolution affected us, all jobs were blue collar jobs at the time, right? So it disrupted that dimension.
Unless you worked at IBM back then.
You probably not in the 30s, but like it's actually the white collar jobs that are being threatened now.
Yeah.
And so, and which is why you see a whole lot of more people who are writing about the anxiety of this, because it's white collar people who are being threatened and they're the ones doing the writing. So like there are some interesting differences there, but I mean, if human nature is unchanging in the sense of like how we are created is not something that we can transcend on our own, then I do think that we will find by necessity outlets for that culture making, earth dominion, filling the earth and subduing it kind of impulse that we absolutely like. If we don't have outlets for that, and if we don't create outlets for that, then our experience of the world is going to be increasingly dehumanizing. And so I do think we will innovate, but I think that's a scary cliff to toe off the edge of, and has a whole lot of like, it brings up a whole lot of questions of like, okay, how do we even get there? I'm done hearing anybody talk about UBI or universal basic income though, because I just think that's one of the most naive and dumb solutions I've ever heard. Like it's just not, it's so patronizing. Like, no, I don't think that's, anyway, that's a whole different thing. That's a Brad rant episode or something. I don't know.
Right. Well, yeah, we'll get you hopped up on cappuccinos and let you talk.
Cappuccinos, man, I'm a shot in the dark guy. You put the straight coffee. Let's just do that. It's great. Anyway.
Well, man, before we go down the rabbit hole on coffee or something like that, we should wind down for the benefit of our users, our listeners.
Users. Oh, no, John.
See what I'm saying? No. We're going downhill, man. We're going downhill.
Oh, no, it's bad. All right. Well, yeah, good talk, Russ. I mean, John, and let's we'll talk to you guys next time.
All right. See you later. Bye-bye. Thank you for listening. If you found this episode helpful, text it to a friend. Please take a minute and rate this podcast. Leaving a review helps other people find us and connect. You can send us questions or feedback by emailing us at posteverythingpod@gmail.com. Thank you.